The Chair. Chapter 1. Fresh lick of paint. Screams echoed the corridor where I stood. I shut my eyes, praying for it to stop. I opened them slowly. The walls were crumbled, old and crumbly, barely supporting the floor I was on. The floor had all sorts of medical utensils and medical sheets on it. No walls on the left side for about 3 meters, and half a wall to the right for about 2, then complete on both sides for the rest of the hall. I spoke into my voice recorder. My job was a historic building inspector, so only my recorder, my helmet, which had a light on, and a visibility jacket which kept me feeling safe in such a spooky place. I tread gently as the floor creaked under my weight. Every footstep I took felt more unsafe than the others. I stood again hearing the screams that I only heard a little while back. Turning around suddenly, I saw the white pristine walls of the original asylum. The building had changed to its past self around the 1870s to 1880s. I myself was born in the 1960s, so this made no sense to me. How was I seeing what I was seeing at that very moment in time? A young woman in her mid-40s, who was wearing a nurse uniform, walked round the corner with a man in a white gown. He was pale, bald and frail. He looked at me and pointed. "Look, there's a woman." "Who, sweetie? There's no one there. Come on, we need to go and get you back and put you to bed." The nurse gently pulled him along to the nearest room. I gulped at the fact the building felt so realistic, but it had to be unreal. Probably the fumes or something in the place. It was just my mind playing vicious tricks. I took a deep breath in and started to choke. I bent over in pain as my lungs tried to grab oxygen out of the air. Once recovered from my breathing attack, I wiped my eyes from the tears that I had produced from the amount of pain I was in, to see the building was back to its future self. Shaking my head in denial, I couldn't believe that the event ever happened. Gathering myself, I walked forward for a while longer to where both the sides of the asylum were complete. Hearing the sounds of running behind me, I stopped. I was about to look around when suddenly the floor collapsed under me. I screamed with fright, just about to grab onto the edge of the floor that was still there. I held on with dear life, begging that it would not end badly, falling to my death. Sharp ends of nails dug into my left hand, making it bleed. The blood flowed down my palm, and my hand sliding down my wrist and my arm, then dripped off my elbow. It was so silent in there that I heard it hit the floor below me. With all my willpower and the fact that I was so scared of dying, I sobbed, pulling myself onto the floor above. I sat there for a good 10 minutes, crying from the scare. I was on my own in a building at this time of night. And now I was shaken up by my near-death experience. Eventually I stood up and went through my pocket. Shit! Where's my phone? I cursed to myself and looked down the hole that had been created by me and to reveal my own phone flashing. 2 messages and 1 missed call. My voice recorder lay next to it, flashing a red light every 30 seconds to tell me that it was still recording. I dropped the video recorder. It's 10:56. I will report again once the voice recorder has been recovered. Shouting, hoping it would pick up the voice. Shh, please be quiet. There are people resting and it's not nice to shout. A young man's voice pierced my left ear. I whipped round and looked straight into the face of a man. He looked 20 or so. He again was pale like the other patient I saw. but he had a lot of hope in his green eyes. They also had a very dark side to them. He was mad and upset with what had happened in his life, and so he wanted to fight with his insanity. His hair was thick, clean and black. He wore a gown like the others, but he was different. Nothing was wrong with him, he just was misunderstood. I won't tell anyone you're here. The man held out his hand. I took it and looked around the place where I stood. It was around the same time period. The walls had a fresh coat of paint and smelt really strong, unlike the other time. The doctor and nurses think I'm mad, but I ain't, I swear. I ain't. I'm just here because they think I'm mad. He tapped my back. See, you're real. Through his excitement, he forgot he had told what he first told me and dragged me to the nearest nurse, who was tending to another patient. The patient who was the guy who pointed me out. The old man looked at me and then looked down, scared. He had red marks on his wrists. He saw me looking at them and hid them from me. They said you weren't real, so go away. He said quietly so the nurse did not hear him, but in an angry tone. He then punched me away, catching me out completely. I fell back. The young man walked back into his room while the young man and the nurse argued. Look, nursey, here's my friend. He pulled me off the floor in front of him. Hi, I spoke, and then he was interrupted by the nurse. Dwight, there is no one there. It's in your mind, fake, not real. The young man, who was known as Dwight, went into a rage fit. I ignored him and went to the room at the end of the corridor that caught my attention. On the door it said, a chair, just in plain black writing, and it was just painted on the door. I pushed the door gently to reveal an empty dentist chair that has several attachments to it, like leather straps and strange wires that were attached to a box under a cloth covering it. I walked in a little more and screamed. I had covered my eyes, but I forced myself to look. A woman. She was hanging from the roof by her arms that were chained. Hooks poked through her skin, across her calf muscles and down up her torso. Blood dripped from her every hole that was pierced through those hooks. This created a puddle of blood underneath her. These were here to prevent her from moving. Any movement would cause unbearable amount of pain, but she didn't seem to be conscious anyway. I was interrupted by two men who were dragging young Dwight in. Help! I gotta get out of here! Please, friend, help me, please! He shouted at me. I was trying to reach out to grab my hand, but the men pulled him away from me and strapped him to the dentist chair. Do we really have to go through this again? Over and over again. Dwight, anyone who is in a gown or a uniform or has a name tag works here. If not, they are not real. They are all fake. They are not real. All in your mind, you silly man. A man walked out in with a coat. He looked like a doctor, of course. Doctor, she's right there in the corner. His voice panicked. He struggled to pull out of the straps, his face now turning red from the struggle. I gasped as the two men who dragged him into the room, held his head into place and fitted around his forehead a metal plate. They can't see me, Dwight. I reasoned with him, put my hand out, showing that there's to stop struggling. He shook his head and kept trying to prove his damn point. Look, she just talks to me. He pointed again. It's rude to point. The doctor put his gloves on and slapped Dwight round the face hard. doctor left side of his face, making him yelp in shock. "Please, I'm telling the truth." Dwight's voice was so much more panicked now. "I was speaking, and once again..." The doctor swung at him, this time connecting harder, making him bleed. Blood dripped out of his mouth. He spat on the floor, the bubbling puddle of pink spit. This made me shudder as I looked at my left hand, thinking of now dig into my hand. "Boys, get it ready." The doctor looked towards the girl who was strung up. He cut the wires that were attached to the hooks and undone the chains. "Annie, you are not normal. You are different. Disobey again and I will put you in a lot more pain for a lot longer. Do you understand?" He shouted in her face. Annie mutely nodded and, helped up by the nurse who followed the doctor in. Annie looked me into the eyes and mouthed help. I shook my head and whispered something into her ear. Annie nodded and hummed a song to herself. Dwight was being plugged into the generator that had 6 settings. They put a piece of cloth into his mouth, which was covered in a piece of wood. He started shouting loudly for help, or what sounded like shouting, if the man weren't forcing this piece of wood into his throat, making him gag every so often. Then a horrid crackling noise surrounded the room. Dwight screamed as the electricity seeped through his body. They turned it off and Dwight relaxed. He spat out the wood. "She is still there! She is still real!" Without a word, they turned the power up and shocked him. The body tensed, and due to him spitting out the wood, he bit into his tongue, spraying blood everywhere. The blood covered the doctor and the nurse who walked back in. The walls behind them were also covered. The nurse shrieked and started wiping what she could from her face. Dwight screamed in agony as the electricity stopped and the pain of his tongue set in. They had undone the straps and dragged him out of the room. His body weak from the amount of blood that he had lost. He was still bumbling and murmuring, "She is real. She's still there." "Clean up the mess. I will fix him up and get Mr. Johnson dressed as well. He's walking around naked." The doctor walked out the room, wiping his glasses, then dropped his white lab coat behind him. He pushed the naked man out the way. The man was around the age of mid-50s, ran past the door, completely naked, singing a tune that sounded a hell of a lot like a new song that had recently come out in 1979. I think it was called "It's Raining Men," but it couldn't be. I laughed at the man as his bits and pieces moved with his wiggling body.